The most valuable item ever seen on Antiques Roadshow. Antiques Roadshow presenter for 24 years, Lark E. Mason, thought he'd seen it all. But during one episode, he was confronted with a statue that left him stunned and shocked, especially when the woman told him how she had acquired such a unique item. While he'd seen people bring precious items from all over the world and loved trying to decipher the history and value of the item, Mason never expected such a rare item ever being brought in front of him. It should have been just another episode of Antiques Roadshow for Lark E. Mason, but it turned into a story that he would recall time and time again. It was early 2002 as the owner walked towards him. Mason's eyes only saw the lion statue that was being brought to him. He had spent a lifetime learning and teaching about antiques, especially from China. So if anyone could find more about the unassuming statue, it was Mason. And just by simply looking at it, he knew that the owner had no idea how valuable of an item he was holding in his hands. The first question Mason asked was, how did she get it? But the answer wasn't as simple as the question. It seemed that the statue had been in the owner's family for a long time, and her early memories of how it came to be in her family are pretty murky. My grandparents picked it up. They traveled a lot in China, she said. When were they in China? Mason asked. The lady replied by saying, probably in the early part of the century. Where have you had this since then? Mason asked. My mother's had it in her house, and since then I inherited it and brought it west, she said. Since then, the statue has stayed in the corner of the living room. She even gave it a name, Leo the Lion. To the owner, the statue wasn't just a piece of history, but an item that was part of her family, something which bound 3 generations of her family together. While it had a great sentimental value, no one in her family knew the real monetary value of the piece. For someone as experienced as Mason was in the world of antiques, it was amazing to see him become so genuinely emotional on air, especially since at the point he had seen hundreds of antiques. Okay, well, we'll start by saying when this came up, I could barely, he said. He was lost for words and was slightly trembling. His deep love for history and antiques were making it hard for him to stay professional. But he had to pull himself together because the owner deserved to know more about Leo the Lion. He inspected it further and said, "It's fantastic. This is truly—" "I'm sorry, I'm a little worked up," he said. "This is among the finest examples of Chinese art that we've seen on the roadshow. The carving is beautiful. The workmanship is stunning," Mason continued. "The carver who did this was truly a master," he said. "You can see the muscles rippling under the surface. It's the finest quality marble you can get. It's truly magnificent." To the layman's eyes, the lion statue looks like any other. But Mason tried to explain why he was so overwhelmed by this piece of history by showcasing the small details around the side of the statue. "As you look at this, any way you look at it, it's fantastic, breathtaking," Mason said. "Every detail in the craftsmanship has been saved, making it a pristine specimen that was meant for museums, not living rooms. But still, this detail still doesn't seem enough to drive the antique expert to tears. It was also because of its rarity. I see little tiny versions of these that come in for sale, but I've never seen one like this," he said. And he wasn't exaggerating. To date, they haven't found a single statue of this size in the same style, and surely they were once created, but none has survived and made it into the hands of historians. The more Mason talked about Leo, the more the owner knew that what her grandparents had found was surely a once-in-a-lifetime purchase. It seemed like her family was meant to have this piece of history. And Mason agreed. "Your grandparents bought something when they were on their trip that you can't get now," he said. He continued, "You can see examples like this in museums. Occasionally they come up at auction. It's wonderful." It wasn't just the size that Mason was impressed with, but also that most other lion statues which had survived had been damaged, but Leo seemed to have been untouched by history. Something that's been handled and has been around for a while, it's a great thing. Rarely do you find something so beautiful and unscathed that's been around for so long. Most statues or artifacts as old as the statue would have had at least a handful of blemishes. But one thing that was rather off about the statue, and the reason why the owner never thought it was worth anything, was because there weren't any visible signatures present on the statue. The artist didn't sign it, the owner brought up, thinking that would affect the value of the piece, but Mason had an explanation for that as well. No, these were never signed, Mason followed up with, and assuring her that it wouldn't affect the value. During the owner's initial search for information regarding the statue, she was told that it was likely from the Ming Dynasty. but she was just about to find out that this information couldn't be further from the truth. Just with a look, Mason knew that this wasn't the case, and this is another reason why he was so emotional in the first place. It was from the Tang dynasty. This dates from the golden period of Chinese art, which is called the Tang dynasty between the 6th and 9th century, he said. So how much was it worth? The statue comes from the time of the Tang dynasty, the Chinese Empire, which existed between 618 and 907 AD. Well, we haven't done the math, but just by looking at the time frame, you can imagine that it was a very, very long time ago. The time period is also considered by many experts to be the golden age of art in ancient China. Everything from music to literature was changing and evolving in this era, creating some of the most iconic items in the world, including Leo the Lion. To think that the work from the Tang dynasty would one day find its way into a suburban home in New Mexico and later on a national TV show, the odds were very slim and only added to the drama of it all. Though that doesn't say that Tang's work didn't stretch far and wide. Chinese craftsmanship was appreciated and exported to all parts of the world, especially India and the Middle East. The lion statue is just a hint of the real beauty of that majestic time. While many more sculptures can be traced back to the Tang dynasty, most are dotted around China and rarely make their way to the West. Also, at that time, Buddhism was the most commonly practiced religion in the country, and a huge amount of these statues depicted Buddha in all varying sizes. Due to this reason, the lion statue is even rarer since it wasn't widely produced. Another example which would provide more context to how important Leo was to history is to know that recently the Longmen Grottos, a cave system depicting Chinese Buddhist carvings, was given World Heritage status by the governing body of UNESCO since the turn of the millennium. The carvings were referred to as an outstanding manifestation of human artistic creativity for their size and magnificence, and this lion statue was created somewhere during that same time. When the lion statue resurfaced, it surely headlines inside the Antiques Roadshow community. On the official website of the show, Larry Canal, who is the editor-in-chief, has said that the lion is one of, if not the greatest and most important antiques to ever pass through the Antiques Roadshow. In his account with the Antiques Roadshow Insider, Mason stated, "Surprise, astonishment, and disbelief washed over me the moment the owner of a white marble lion walked up to the Asian Arts table in Albuquerque last summer." He said, "Discovering a Tang Dynasty lion in such an unexpected venue, however, ranks as one of the greatest surprises of my career. It's exceptional not only for its size, around 18 inches tall, but because of its quality and condition." As far as Mason was concerned, the statue's base spoke volumes. "One of the ways that I can tell you it's what's supposed to be, not only from the artistic aspect of it," Mason said, "but when you look at it underneath, you can see that there's every indication of great age, from the chisel work that's taken place to the sort of sandy surface, which is fantastic. That gives you that kind of patina that you see there." Again, one of the things that Mason just couldn't get over about the statue was the original crafter's incredible consideration to detail. The craftsman treated this large sculpture in a manner more typical of carvings of a much smaller size, he said. "The surface is smooth and unmarred from damage. The details are as crisply rendered as the day it left the carver's workshop. I told the lion's owner that its value might be a bit more than expected. The question remained, though, how much was it actually worth?" And now we reveal what you all came for. The value of the item about which Mason said, "I would feel pretty confident that one could get between $120,000 and $180,000 for it," he said. "However, that might not be its true value. Now, the value I gave you is an auction estimate," he said, "but an insurance figure on this would be somewhere between $150,000 and $250,000, probably toward the high end. I would probably say around $250,000 for insurance purposes." Imagine an 18-inch statue costing a colossal $250,000 in 2002. This figure would have skyrocketed, and even some believed at the time that it should and would be worth much more. Larry Canal recalled, "I told the lion's owner that its value might be a bit more than expected, around $250,000, Canal said, "but the lion's owner took it in stride. She was cool as a cucumber, even if she was as astonished by the value as Mason was by the lion itself. You would think the owner would immediately be ready to sell this family heirloom, but it turns out she had other plans." A couple of years ago, Larry Canal revealed that he, like us, was intrigued as to what happened to Leo the lion. Turns out, despite Mason's insistence and appreciation of the statue and stating that it belonged in a museum, the owner quietly took it back home. It seemed like all she wanted was the value to be appraised, and Leo would stay with her in her living room, waiting to be handed down to the next generation of her family.